Hey everyone, excited to come back and continue our sermon series On the Road Again. And hope that you're having a good summer. Hope that this last week has been good for you. It's been an awesome week here at Tower Hill. We've had VBS, which is always fun, and it's amazing just the production of what it takes to make it happen. But so good, so important. And if you were a volunteer for that, a very special thank you to you. So as we continue this journey on the road again, I'm really excited to bring today's message because it really deals with something that is a reality about what happens sometimes in our unexpected journeys with God. So if you're just jumping into this sermon series, just a couple of reminders about what we've been talking about. The fact that often the most meaningful things that happen to us in our lives, often the most important things, tend to be the unexpected things. And that God, sort of like a journey on a road trip, is that whatever our expectations are about where we should be on this trip, is we need to trust that God knows exactly where we should be and what's going to be best for us in order to flourish. So, you ever have this time when you're playing a video game and the game just ends too soon, right? You have died of dysentery. I don't know, any Oregon Trail fans? So you're playing a game, and it's so frustrating because you think you got it all figured out, and you just keep dying at like the worst time. And what happens is, and you see kids do this all the time, right, is you got to restart the game and do it again. I got to keep restarting, and it drives people crazy. I've seen kids chuck controllers. I've seen not kids, adults, breaking television sets by accident because people get so frustrated when the game ends unexpectedly or ends too soon. When I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I loved the Choose Your Own Adventure books. Those were my absolute favorite. And you get so far in the story, and of course the whole idea, if you're not familiar with these books, is you get to a certain part of the story and it tells you, you can go left, you could go right, you could go straight, for example, and you make a choice and it says, well, if you go left, turn to page 62, and you turn to page 62 and you keep reading. Well, some of those end in the end of the story, like your character dies or something horrible happens. And so immediately you want to go back, but it's so frustrating because you feel like, oh, I've come so far, and only to make the wrong choice and the story to end unexpectedly. Well, I think in life this happens to us too. Sometimes our journeys end unexpectedly. And sometimes that's a source of not just tremendous disappointment, but it could even be a source of despair. I've been telling a lot of stories about my life and my family this summer, and I'm not really sure why. I think it's because I've been doing a lot of reflecting on my own family. It's been just over a year since my father died. We didn't have a particularly close relationship, but it was complicated. And so I'm just now, I think, unraveling some of those complicated feelings. So I was thinking about his story a bit, and I think it pertains to this idea of the unexpected journey and how sometimes that journey that we think we're on just comes to an end. So here's a picture of him and his band. This is Billy Red, was his moniker as an aspiring rock and roll star. This is about 1987. Before my parents got divorced, I remember some of my earliest memories are me sitting on his lap while he was playing guitar. And I know that had an impact on me later in my life, and the decision to pick up a guitar and to start playing and all sorts of things. I remember going into the recording studio where he would be with his band. I remember live performances, and he had developed a name for himself. He had released some albums. He had even gotten to a place where most people or most bands at the time could only have dreamed. So around the same year, 1987, he finds himself, Billy Red, on an MTV show called Smash or Trash. I don't even remember, this is a glorious picture of Adam Curry, who was a VJ back then. Now, if you're under 25, you have no idea the joy of the VJs that were the MTV stable of VJs. But Adam Curry, he was the man. He was the cool one. And anyway, there was this show, Smash or Trash, and the idea is they would show these amateur music videos, and then folks would phone in and vote Smash or Trash. Now, the sheer number of people that tried to get onto this show is staggering. Well, my dad got on. His song Nighthawks, which he made a video for, got on. It was featured on Smash or Trash. And sadly, it was trashed. I remember watching this in real time, just, rooting for him. And not even that I knew him that well, but I'm like, gosh, it's my dad. He made MTV. How cool. Now, when that happened, he definitely had this feeling of, okay, well, what do I do now? He never really got over that moment. In fact, he would try again and again to make it as a musician, to make it as a rock star, and it never really panned out. That moment was actually the closest he ever got. So what happens when we're on a particular journey and it comes to an unexpected end? Where you try for something and it turns out it seems the trying's over. You're in the wrong lane and it's time to switch lanes. What do you do when that happens? Because especially when it comes to our relationship with God, we feel so confident sometimes. Okay, I've been on the mountaintop with God. I'm down the valley. I know the journey that I'm supposed to be on. And then the journey ends in a way that you didn't expect it to end. Like, wait a minute. I thought there's going to be this big glorious payoff at the end. and it feels incomplete. What do I do? What do you and I do? What's the faithful response? How are we supposed to interpret when that happens in our life? Well, the saying is true. There's nothing new under the sun. This is exactly what happened to Moses. We've been tracking with Moses a little bit as we've been following some Old Testament stories of where God meets people on their journey, meeting people on the road, sending people on unexpected journeys. This is Moses at the end of the time that the Hebrews were in the wilderness and they were about to enter the promised land. Now, Moses had failed to trust in God. Remember a couple weeks ago we talked about the number one lesson that God was trying to give to his people was to trust. And he went to great lengths to make sure they learned this lesson before they came into the promised land because they were going to need it. Well, Moses blew it. Towards the end, Moses blew it. And God said, you're not going to enter the promised land. But God, in his mercy, threw Moses a little bit of a bone. He at least showed him the promised land before he died. Let's jump to that scripture now. This is Deuteronomy chapter 34. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah, and as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to him, this is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. When we read that passage, I think it's hard because we're rooting for Moses. We want Moses to be able to go into the promised land, to see it. And we think, well, gosh, why? That seems kind of harsh. Why didn't God let him go into the promised land? Well, again, it's back to this lesson. In fact, Moses was given a direct order by God to do something, and he just flat out didn't do it. He didn't do it that way. And again, in order for his people to receive the blessing that they needed, to receive the blessing that he had promised them, he needed them to trust. And Moses just in a huge way fumbled the ball on trusting God. But again, God shows him the promised land. Now, when I think about this story, I think about, oh my gosh, just the disappointment. Could you imagine the disappointment Moses must have felt? So I know it's hard to get your brain there, because we're so far removed from that culture. But just think a minute about Moses' journey in Egypt, burning bush, the plagues, the Exodus, 40 years in the wilderness, all these things that he went through only to not be able to cross the promised land. His journey comes to this unexpected end. And what does he do? He ends well. He ends that time really well. It's not what he wanted. It's not what he had hoped. It's not what he'd been working his whole life for. But in the end, it is the way God designed it to end. And I think Moses, and the way that finishes, is probably the most faithful example of a good ending that I can imagine, because his unfaithful moment was not his legacy in the end. You see, they're saying there was nobody like Moses. There's no prophet like Moses. He did it right. He was the one who knew God face to face. That's what we remember about Moses. Listen, Moses could have handled that a whole bunch of different ways. He could have complained. He could have even sabotaged. He could have not trained up Joshua to do the work. He could have done a lot of things that would have made that whole ending a lot less clean, a lot more difficult, a worse handoff than he did. But what does that mean for us? What does that mean when we are on our journey? Sometimes it's even the journey that we feel God gave us, and it comes to an unexpected end. Well, I think first off, we have to acknowledge that maybe just like a choose your own adventure book, you need to go back to another decision point that you had that led you there and make a different decision. That's always a possibility. It's always possible that we zigged when we should have zagged, and that God actually wanted us on a different path, and that's why this journey didn't work out the way that we thought it would. That's definitely a possibility. And the only way you find that out is really through prayer, through trial and error, through discernment, that spiritual discernment of, maybe, and usually you can identify that moment where it went wrong, or that season where it went wrong. You know what? I had a feeling I should have done this, and instead I did this. So maybe it is like that. Maybe it is a bit like a choose your own adventure. I need to go back to that decision point and go down a different option. But what happens when we don't feel that way? When actually, no, this was the path that we know that God had us on. What do we do when it comes to an unexpected end? I think let's first acknowledge the disappointment. Number one, remember, disappointment is not a sin. How many times do you think Jesus was disappointed in his disciples? Disappointment is not a sin. But letting that disappointment crush you is a sin. Listen, we all deal with disappointment in our life's journey. But if you let it hijack your joy, if you let it rob you of all the possibilities that God has for you moving forward, what are you doing? You're not trusting in God. You're not putting your faith in him. You are idolizing something else. If you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping something else. If you're not trusting God, you're trusting something else, and that's a sin. Listen, God is bigger than our disappointment, and we have to trust that. We have to trust that despite our feelings, God knows exactly what we need. He knows what his kingdom needs in order to grow. And our part in the kingdom may not be we're the hero of the story. In fact, it's probably not. God's the hero of the story. We are playing our part. We are playing a role. And maybe that role means it's not going to end the way exactly that we think or hope. Maybe the best we could do is say, look, I'm disappointed. I'm sad that it didn't work out, but I trust God. I trust God that he knows what he's doing. And in the end, in Moses' story, you never get the sense that he's kind of complaining about his situation. Of course, he had to be disappointed, but you actually get the sense that Moses is grateful he got to see the promised land at all. The second thing is, maybe you've gone as far as you were ever meant to go. I often think about my dad in the band, Billy Red. Later in his life, fairly recently, I'd say in the last 10 years, he came to know Jesus. And I wonder if he would have known Jesus at all had he made it as a world-renowned rock band. You know, would he have come to Jesus without the void that he was feeling? Would he, if he weren't in kind of a hard place where he had to really do some self-examination, would he have come to that conclusion that Jesus is what he needed all along? I don't know. But I just know that sometimes the most successful journey, it might feel incomplete to us, but it's complete according to God. Maybe we were never meant to go any further than that journey we end up on and it comes to the end. Maybe that is what a successful journey looks like to us. Maybe it doesn't meet your expectations, but maybe it's exactly what God knew you needed. Again, that takes trust that God knows what he's doing. Because the truth is, it's like, bringing Moses onto the top of Mount Nebo. It's perspective. God gave Moses perspective at the end, and we are reminded that God has a perspective that we can't possibly even imagine. He can see all things. He knows all things. Again, he knows where on our path we're going to flourish and where we're going to fall. And we have to trust that he sees more than we do. And listen, not for nothing. Let's say Moses did get to go into the promised land. He was well north of 110 years old. If you remember anything about that story, we're actually going to get into next week. There were some major issues. There were some battles that had to be won. Moses wasn't going to be able to go into battle. Are you kidding me? Yes, God can do all things, but I think Moses was spared as he hands the torch off to Joshua, who's able to get the job done and bring God's people into the promised land. Maybe it didn't work out because you were only supposed to go so far. So what do we do? Well, I think then the third thing is focus on what you still can do. Is there a Joshua that you can mentor? Is there a Joshua that you're meant to hand things off to? Is your role in the kingdom of God to give a good handoff to another generation of leader or another leader, and they're going to complete the mission that you were on? Moses laid hands on Joshua. He conferred to Joshua the authority to be the next leader. Maybe your journey is more about the legacy that you're going to leave behind. Maybe it's about the handoff you're going to give. And that's something that we don't always think of because we're always thinking in the moment. We're like, well, what's this going to mean for me? Am I going to get what I want? Am I going to reach my dreams? Well, maybe God's dreams are much bigger than the dreams that you have. Maybe God's dreams are going to be a blessing to many people, not just to you. And maybe that means you're only going to get so far and then you're going to hand off. But is there a way that you can start making a good handoff? Is there a Joshua in your life that you see you're supposed to start handing some things off to? Maybe it's about your legacy. Or the fourth thing is maybe finishing well is the last faithful act that you have in that particular journey. Moses is honored for the way that he ends things. Now, of course, his life ended, and I don't mean that every journey we have, if it doesn't work out, then our life is going to end. But that's what the journeys feel like. It feels like a part of us is dying when we see we've only gotten so far, and it looks like we're going to go no further. Can God break through that barrier? Always. He always can. But sometimes it's clear, and you know when that particular journey has ended. So what does all this mean? Again, in these journeys that we take with God, it's all about trust. It's all about trusting that God knows and we don't. And it doesn't eliminate the disappointment that we have, but it should never lead us to despair. Never. Because we trust that God knows what he's doing. He brought us this far. He is not just going to leave us, right? He didn't just leave his people in the wilderness. He brought them through the wilderness. When you see the wilderness, keep going. God's going to bring you out. He's going to bring you to the place that you're supposed to be. He's going to hand you the blessing. Now, on that particular journey, it may mean, okay, well, I've done everything I can here, and it's time to find that next journey that God has me. I know that's easier said than done, but this is an important thing. Because I think there are sometimes we are, especially in our world today, where it's all about getting after it and following your dreams and, being productive. And, it's you're the only one who could put a lid on your own success, that kind of stuff. That's all well and good, but sometimes God's just like, nope, that's it. That's as far as that particular journey goes. Let me get you on the next journey, whether it's in this life or the next. Listen, whatever it is, Sometimes God is as much about faithful endings as he is faithful beginnings. And we need to embrace whatever God gives us on the road, and that we would embrace whatever unexpected journey continues to come our way, and recognize that he's the one who knows when our journey is complete. Amen.